right, we have a small, intimate session today. Um, but I'm Jimmy. I lead product marketing at Moloco. And today we're going to talk about bad mobile ads. So before we even dive into the deck, just want to tell a little personal story. So prior to joining Moloco, I joined in December. I worked at TikTok for almost 3 years and led the product strategy and operations team for performance measurement. And, I was telling people I was leaving Moloco and, saying my goodbyes. And I was talking to the head of strategy at TikTok and he was like, hey, oh, that's so interesting you're joining Moloco. Like we just started doing a competitive audit on Moloco. Like we've been seeing really good results both on their UA team, plus like some of our advertisers have been talking about it. He's like, do you know, by the way, like does Moloco do any sketchy stuff? And I was like, I honestly don't know. The reason I joined Moloco is due to, I used to work at Google as well, and some of the leaders at Google joined Moloco, and I was like, I don't think they would join a company that was doing some of this, sketchy attribution behavior. And he was saying, yeah, like, we've done competitive audits at other DSPs and noticed some, kind of weird stuff going on. And, when I joined Moloco at the end of December, I was happy to see that, Moloco largely didn't do any of this stuff, which we'll be talking about today. But, we've been really thinking pretty deeply about, what's going on in the ecosystem and what's causing all this, bad behavior that's made it really hard for marketers to understand, like, actually impact from their ads. And so with that, we're going to talk about, rallying for change, like how we all can take action today to fix the mobile ad ecosystem. And essentially, the byline is like a click, like no longer is like a click, and you can't really take it at face value anymore, which we'll talk about in a second. So, we'll quickly go through, we'll start pessimistic and kind of talk about all the issues in the ecosystem to start of like how this is, become really complex for marketers to really truly understand, like, is an actual click leading to a conversion, or is it just taking credit from other channels? We'll talk about some of the values. We've been thinking pretty deeply about this at Moloco, and we're going to go to market with some values and promises to the market of how we think about addressing this issue. And then finally, this is complex. It's not easy to untangle, but there are certain tactical things you can do today to help make sense of this. So first, let's face it, right? Bad mobile ads are literally everywhere. It took me I'm not kidding, probably 15 seconds to find these headlines. I just Googled some bad mobile ads and there's a million articles about it. Even from publications of the New York Times, right? This isn't just like an ad tech thing. People are noticing there's so many bad mobile ads right now, and it's really, impacting their user experience. There's memes out there, right? You have the sun and Mercury, then you have my finger and the close ad button. Then you have, Adam Jaffe, who we've been, working closely with, talking about fixing your effing X button. And, I think bad ads become like pretty pervasive, and it's kind of the norm these days. And users are pretty fed up, right? Like they don't like this bad ad experiences. I talk to my friends. I'm like, oh yeah, I work in digital advertising. I'm like, oh, you're the reason I see all this like crappy ads everywhere. And these poor experiences impact like the entire ecosystem, right? It's not just for marketers, but it impacts users, it impacts publishers, and then obviously it does impact, marketers as well. So what it means, right? I think it's important to look at like the history of like how we got to where we are today. If you think about digital advertising in general, right? Like the reason digital advertising is probably one of the most profitable businesses ever is due to measurement, right? You can understand if a user clicks on it and takes an action. You can understand I put in $100 and I got out, 120 or whatever it might be. But this is kind of starting to change, right? And so from 2017 to pre-ATT, something we call the fat thumb era, whereas definitely there's been improvements in like machine learning, targeting, bidding, paying the right price for the right user, but also some deceptive creative started to get into the mix. And this is, hard to close X buttons, maybe multiple N cards, things like that. And so CTR rates, if you look at CTR rates over time, they definitely were inching up, right? It's probably a combination of like, just better advertising, but also some of these deceptive creatives. Then, we had ATT. And it's kind of upended everything, right? We all know in the mobile app ecosystem. And what it did to, and even before we talk about CTR, right, is like, so now marketers have scan, obviously, and there's a lot of limitations from it. And then now you have probabilistic attribution from MMPs. And so if you look at probabilistic attribution from MMPs, which a lot of people do given the limitations of scan, ATT like absolutely supercharged CTR rates. And so, we've seen people come to us and say, hey, I'm seeing like close to 100% CTR. Obviously, if you have 100 ad impressions, not 100 people aren't going to be so engaged that they're clicking on that ad, right? And so something's going on, and a lot of this is due to some of these kind of deceptive behaviors going on in the industry now, which we'll talk about. And so, I think the main takeaway, right, is like with the loss of deterministic data, networks and exchanges and people across the ecosystem are trying to get as much credit as possible to kind of prove their worth, because deterministic data is no longer as available, especially on iOS, right? And so some of these examples of these deceptive ad experiences, it makes it really, really hard for marketers to determine user intent. And so you have like impossible to close X buttons, right? You have multiple end cards, and then you have SK overlay. There's a little fun graphics, but for the X buttons, we've all probably experienced it, right? The X button either moves around, or you try to click on the X button and it actually registers a click. You have multiple end cards popping up. We've seen some people complain about 4 or 5 end cards popping up and being totally disruptive to the user experience. And then SK overlay, right? SK overlay was introduced with Scan, which is like kind of the pop-up where, the iOS pop-up where you can download the app directly from the ad without going to the App Store. And SK overlay is an interesting one. Because SK overlay is part of Apple Scan and StoreKit, probabilistic attribution has no insight into if a click happened or not on SK overlay. And so what a lot of networks we've seen doing is every time SK overlay renders, a network triggers a click. They have no idea what happens, whether a click happened or a view or anything, but they say, hey, we have no visibility. We're just going to trigger a click and hope for the best. And so what happens is like many users are forced to click, or a click is even triggered automatically. And it's regardless of user intent. So a click is no longer a click, meaning it's very hard to untangle. Users are actually engaged with ads versus users that are forced to click. And what this does is it makes measurement like really complex, right? Because some clicks are intended, some clicks aren't. And for marketers, right, like typical marketing metrics, whether like CPA, ROAS, whatever, it may look like positive in the short term, but these are likely inflated, right? So if you're firing clicks all over the place, you're likely going to claim attribution credit from a user that would have converted anyways without seeing that ad, whether it's from organic, whether it's from an actually other network. And so, it's kind of this land grab of trying to claim as much credit as possible. Whereas, the typical marketing metrics, it doesn't tell the whole story of like, actually, is it incremental users I'm getting with my advertising dollars? And so, we did a podcast actually with Singular. I was talking to a few folks that listened to it. They coined a term that is a kind of a click arms race, right? So this is like trying to get as much credit as possible, and it impacts everyone, right? Across users, publishers, and marketers. For users, very obvious, right? Users are fed up with these experiences. And it causes frustration and churn, especially for publishers. And John, who we did the podcast with, he talks about this kind of revolving circle where it's, hey, look, this user really loved this ad, even though they might not have clicked it and triggers happened, and then they keep serving ads to them because they think it's an engaged user, and it's kind of this revolving circle. For publishers, right, like users don't understand the intricacies of exchanges and networks and how ads are served on apps and how everything works. And so what they see is they see a bad user experience. They're like, screw this app. This app is worthless, right? Similar to the magazine article, I did like a 2-second search and found 1 million 1-star reviews for various publishers. Majority of them complain about the ad experience, right? And so it says like so many ads now, almost impossible to play, can't play, too many ads, they won't let you go back to the game, very, very frustrating. And so for marketers, right, like we talked about this, but you might see short-term attribution gains, right? But it's likely superficial. So if someone is triggering clicks all over the place, you're going to have people that would have installed, organically or from another channel be attributed to a certain network. And Jaffe from Mega Studio is like, this is why people hate ads in games. Sure, it can make a bit extra money, but the UX is so unbelievably horrible that it's often not worth it for the game in terms of retention. So, we're going to keep going pessimistic, and then we'll get a little positive in a second. And, when we were thinking about this at Moloco, right, like, we're like, okay, like what can we do to help fix this? And it's hard, right? It's not a very easy thing to fix. We're thinking deeply about how to do it, but I think it's important to understand kind of what's going on. And the problem is like driven by incentives, right? Like most things. And so for ad networks, right, they're aggressively triggering clicks to maximize credit. Exchanges also, right? It's also a competitive business, and they want to maximize, as much credit as possible. We actually ran an internal experiment at Moloco where we never triggered a click for anything, 0 clicks, and we still had CTR rates with some of our exchange partners that were 10, 15% because we didn't control how creatives were rendered sometimes. And then on the publisher side, right? Like, if you're a publisher, sure, these short-term clicks that are happening, you might see revenue increase in the short term, right? But it's definitely become, at the expense of retention and user experience. We were talking with, Unity and Zynga, and they have some really interesting data that we'll publish later. And I'd recommend if you guys attended MAU to review their session, which they're talking about this, some hard data on like how this is actually impacting publishers. And then finally on measurement, right? Right now, you guys have basically visibility into views and clicks, and that's it, right? There's no way to untangle what clicks were intentional, what clicks weren't, the different types of views, and this is pretty limited, right? And it doesn't, you don't have the tools to kind of untangle like, hey, what type of creatives are people clicking on? How are clicks being triggered? And what's happening. And so part of this, right, is the tragedy of the commons. And so, we've talked to a lot of these ecosystem players, and, some don't know that this is going on, some do. And for the ones that do, we often hear is like, hey, it's a competitive business. If I don't do it, someone else will, and I'm gonna lose out, right? But, we really do think it like requires collective effort. And so this isn't gonna be fixed by Moloco itself, right? This is gonna have to be an ecosystem thing. And so, we've been talking to all of these different partners to figure out how we do it. And we are on our way, which I can talk about in a little bit. All right, so that was the negative stuff. All right, so for Moloco, how are we thinking about this? And like, what are we making some promises? And so these things are gonna take a while, right? This is not gonna happen overnight. But I definitely wanna kind of highlight a few things that we're thinking about. So first is like visibility and transparency. And so this goes back to, the clicks and views is the only thing you guys have access to right now. We really believe that if advertisers have more access to interaction types, understanding how many clicks came from an SK overlay, how many clicks came from an end card, how many clicks came from a CTA, you can start to untangle some of these issues. And we're committing to giving detailed and like granular metrics to advertisers, and we're working on it. The second is ecosystem partnerships, right? We want the industry to evolve. We don't think this is good, for anyone. We think it's not necessarily, sustainable for the long term. So we're working very closely with MMPs on getting some more of these granular reporting. We're working with exchanges on refraining from sending these bad creative experiences, and we're working with publishers. There's a publisher coalition right now, like kind of taking a stand against bad mobile ads, and we've been partnering with them as well. And I think the point is that we also want to provide like real value, and like real value is pretty simple. It's, hey, like if you're spending marketing dollars, like you're gaining incremental users that otherwise wouldn't have gotten, right? And so, I think that's kind of gone away a little bit with everything that's been going on in the ecosystem. But like that is like a motto and like a credo that we are invested in at Moloco. Third is advertiser control. We want to make sure advertisers have the choice of how they show their ads. And give them options, if you want to do SK overlay or not, if you want to show, end cards or things like that. So as we introduce new features, we're going to have toggles in the front end at MCP, or you can work with your sales rep to, understand what is best for each business. And then finally is, new product solutions, right? The existing like product suite across the ecosystem isn't enough, we believe. And so like more work needs to be done to offer advertisers like more granularity into understanding, click types and views, and different types of ad engagements. And then, continue investing in attribution and incrementality, right? Everything we've talked about so far has been on the attribution side. Incrementality, which we'll talk about in a bit, is immune a little bit to this like clicks arms race, which we'll talk about. And so, yeah, like, this is going to be a journey for sure. I think this is, I'll say this is probably one of the #1 things at Moloco right now that we're concerned about and thinking about across product, across go-to-market, across our sales teams. But we believe like, it's very important to fix this, and I think for like the betterment of the ecosystem. And then finally, what you guys can do today. Excuse me. So I think, while all of that stuff we talked about on the last slide is going to take a little bit of time, there are things you can do today to help untangle what's going on. So the first is review your existing channels. We'll dive deeper in a second, but don't necessarily take attribution numbers at face value. And if you're allocating media spend based on an apples to apples comparison, be aware of how attribution is happening in each channel. It'll help you make better decisions. Invest in incrementality. Incrementality is like a causal relationship, right? You have a test group, you have a control group, then you look at the impact. There's no attribution required, so it's a bit immune to this attribution gaming. And then reevaluate and test your media dollars. Especially my time working at TikTok is we did all these crazy tests and all this certain stuff, and a lot of advertisers had this analysis paralysis where they did all this work and then didn't know how to use it. And so have an open mindset in tests, and we can talk about that in a second. Sorry. So first is review your existing channels. Ask them hard questions how do they define clicks? Are they automatically triggering clicks since it'll vary by channel? And don't take their attribution numbers at face value. Ask questions and dive deep with them. I'm sure they'll be open to tell you, maybe not, but don't assume something's going on. I think an interesting indicator to see if a channel you need to spend more time on is click-through rates, right? So if you see if your click-through rates, let's say 15% across channels, and you see another channel with 70%, something's probably up, right? That channel, probably doesn't have the best creative. They might have better, whatever, but likely is something up if there's a drastic difference in CTR by a certain channel, or if multiple channels have extremely high CTR rates. So spend time with them and understand what's going on and how they're triggering clicks and allocating attribution credit. Second, right, invest in incrementality. Incrementality, as we talked about, is not impacted by this click arms race. There's various types of incrementality, right? There's conversion lift, there's geotest, there's media mix modeling. I'm not saying incrementality is perfect right now, right? With iOS 14, the old way of running conversion lifts all the time across Android and iOS is no longer possible. Android's still definitely feasible, but iOS people are still figuring it out. But experiment with other types of incrementality, right? Experiment with MMM, experiment with geo, and these things aren't as real time as attribution, obviously, but it helps you kind of triangulate and understand what's going on by channel. And this isn't relying on attribution, which is the important takeaway. And I think the final thing for incrementality that I've seen happen is try to run as standardized tests as possible across your channels, right? So you take conversion lift, for example. Someone will pitch a conversion lift and you run it. They could be very different based on the p-values, based on one-tail or two-tail tests, based on DSP versus SAN, right? They're very different. CLS, even within the realm of CLS, they're very different. And so just make sure you try to have a standardized approach as much as possible. And that'll eventually help you fairly compare performance across channels. And then finally, this would be a quick one, but reevaluate your media dollars. So put your knowledge to use. If you invest the time in understanding how your channels are defining clicks, if you invest time in experimenting with incrementality or new ways of incrementality, use these new insights. You guys have access to the actual installs and the actual revenue growth for your games. And so, start to shift media spend and see how things are changing. I know this isn't an easy thing to do, or it's maybe a new way to do things, but it's important to kind of have an open mindset and start experimenting. And then the last thing I'll say, and I'll open for questions, is I think this is a hard problem. We talked about it, and it's not going to be solved overnight. Moloco can't solve it on its own. But we really believe that you can be at the vanguard of change if you start to take action and be ahead of the curve. We think this is going to happen and evolve, but it's important to take action today. And I think the four things I would leave you guys with is number one, educate yourself. This deck is very much the tip of the iceberg. It's a complicated subject. You're not going to be an expert just by listening to me today. So spend time in thinking about this, talking to your different partners, talking to your MMPs. And the more you learn, the more value and ideas you'll get to help understand this. Second is spread the word, right? change doesn't happen with just like one person in this room. Like talk about this like openly within your organizations. This might be hard convos to have because, maybe the way you're allocating media dollars or reporting performance to your CFO might change, right? But at the same time is like at the end of the day, you want to drive growth for your company and you do that through, making sure your media dollars are going to acquiring incremental users, not just taking credit from the existing pie, right? Third is like review your metrics, right? We talked about this, but I think it's very important. Don't take metrics at face value if that's how you determine media allocation. Spend time understanding like how clicks are being triggered, what's going on in each network, and it'll help you make better decisions. And then finally, like test and learn, right? Like this is tricky. Have an open mindset. The old way of, maybe you spend years relying on attribution for media credit or allocation of budgets, but have an open mindset, invest in new incrementality solutions, invest in shifting media dollars and understanding new ways to think about measurement. And I think finally is that like we really do care about this at Moloco. It's like a very important initiative for us, and so like we're happy to help. We're happy to talk to you, even if you don't advertise with Moloco, it's fine. Like we still want to talk to you about this stuff. I'm happy to chat later today or at the booth or happy hour or whatever it might be. So with that, thank you. And then I would love, if there's any questions, I'd love to answer them. The question just so everyone here is like, does Moloco offer incrementality and what type of questions I should be asking essentially to run it? Other partners. Like what should I ask the other partners? Ghost bidding, exactly. It's all very nuanced. So yes, Moloco does have incrementality testing. We have conversion lift right now. We are investing in geo pretty soon. We are hopefully building out like an MMM partnership program with like MMM vendors that we like trust and know. I think if you were, so like let's say your partner has like ghost bidding, right? Or they might have placebo ads or something like that, right? So it's important to like go through the qualifications with them and like understand what is right for you because there's differences. One thing I would recommend doing though is like, let's say you wanted to test another DSP against that DSP via incrementality testing, run the same type of incrementality test across both networks, right? If you run a placebo test, this kind of gets nerdy, but like if you run a placebo test on one partner and a ghost bidding test on another partner, the results aren't going to be the same. It's not like a fair comparison. So I think the most important thing is like whatever way you decide to run incrementality is like try to do it in like the most standardized way possible.
So common conversation when talking to a new DSP is, they say transparency, they talk CPA. I'm just wondering what the red flags are that you would cite when talking to a new DSP, potential DSP partner. Like what should we, like I don't even think about clicks. I'm
CPA, for
so
sure.
You're saying check out the clicks. Like I don't ever look at the clicks. I'm looking at the.
Yeah, it's a great.
And if I'm missing something, I'd like to know.
Yeah, great question. So the reason I was talking about CTR is it's like upstream of CPA, right? Meaning it's an indicator of like something is happening. Whereas like, I'm not saying CTR is a metric to like compare performance by. It's like a flag to say, hey, something's going on with this DSP. If 70% CTR, because they're firing clicks all over the place. And what that means for CPA and ROAS is that they're claiming credit due to all those click firing. So you might see lower CPAs or ROAS, but is that actually incremental from like a user that's influenced by ad? Probably not. And so I think like it's not saying CTR is like a metric to review performance at all. It's like a flag to understand if something like kind of strange is going on. I think like CTR is like one flag. There's many of them, which one of those could be. I think the way I would approach it is if you see something kind of strange going on, like something's a little bit up, and like have the hard conversation with the partner. Be like, deep dive and like don't take what they say at face value. Keep pushing them and like understanding a little bit more under the hood of what's going on. And I think at the end of the day, like, in an ideal world, right, you have everyone the same, everyone treats metrics the same, and it's very easy to compare performance. And in order to get that, you kind of need to like push partners a little bit more to figure out what's going on.